Hello everyone! If you are looking for a unique mystery novel to read this spring, I have good news for you, as Strange Buildings, the third novel by the anonymous YouTuber and mystery writer Uketsu, has been translated from Japanese to English by Jim Rion. It is the third book by Uketsu that Western readers can get to enjoy now. I loved Strange Pictures, the first translated work, and I hated Strange Houses. So how does Strange Buildings, the third one, compare to these two? Was it convincing to me or not? Let me tell you about that in this review. And if you're curious, just stay tuned and let's get started. So before we get started into the review of Strange Buildings, let me give you a proper welcome to my channel. And in case you're new here, a few words about me. My name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of comparative literature in Germany, and I make videos on literary theory and literary classics from ancient times to the present, and occasionally also a review of a contemporary novel like today. So, Uketsu is, as I said, a YouTuber and also a writer of mystery novels. He has been starting out making YouTube videos a few years ago, and then he's been turning these stories into novels. The first one that he was writing was Strange Houses, and the second one Strange Pictures, but in translation they were published the other way around. So first Strange Pictures was translated and then Strange Houses, which makes a lot of sense because Strange Pictures is the much stronger book. It is a lot better in its storytelling and in the psychological depth and the complexity and the way that is just told, at least in my opinion. That's why I said that I loved Strange Pictures and I hated Strange Houses. But for Uketsu himself, first he was writing Strange Houses, then Strange Pictures, and then he was getting back to the idea of Strange Houses for this third novel, Strange Buildings, that we want to talk about today. So, just as a little background information, all of these are centered around some primary sources or found footage. In Strange Pictures, it is drawings, several drawings that actually some schoolboys find on a website, on a blog, and then they realize that something is weird about these pictures, and then other pictures appear and the story picks up from there. So you learn about these drawings and people who have been drawing them and the story behind it and how all of this is connected. And without taking away anything of the plot, I think this is a really strong novel. And then Strange Houses was translated. I was reading it last summer, and it is based on floor plans. Eerie, mysterious floor plans that are having hallways that lead to nowhere, or rooms without windows and you're wondering what is happening there, or rooms without doors and stuff like that. And Strange Houses was told by the perspective of the author, probably Uketsu, but you don't know, it could also be a fictional author, and then his friend Kurihara, an architect who always helps him solve cases, and he's like the genius of the story because he's the one who makes all the important connections. So it's a little bit from the structure like Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson from Arthur Conan Doyle. So they are doing all the deductions and trying to solve the mystery behind these eerie floor plans. And in Strange Buildings, Uketsu picks up on that idea, but now it's not only floor plans, but it's also really about the buildings and the people living in the buildings. It's 11 different cases and each of them is quite different. You have this general structure that usually it's a lot of dialogue between the author or the journalist investigating the cases, talking to the people who have been approaching him, telling them about their weird stories or backgrounds. For example, the floor plans that they have or something that was just off in their memory, for example. So the idea is actually that after the author Uketsu has been publishing Strange Houses, people were approaching him and telling him so many more stories that he just didn't even know where to stop, and then he was just interviewing them one after the other and learning about their stories. And then he was finding that these 11 cases are actually having a connection. And so you learn one case after the other. And it's always a mixture between the dialogue with the interviewer and the interviewee, so Uketsu and the person telling their story. And then it's also including primary source material, like, for example, a diary entry or a report from another journalist, or just memory that someone tells, or different things. So some stories are actually centered way in the past, and some are centered more like in the present or the rather recent past, and all of them are quite different. Sometimes it's old people telling stories, young people, men, women, children, so it's quite complex. The great thing about this all is that the mixture of these different kinds of primary source material and the dialogue makes it quite easy to read, and it also feels like a collage, so that you as the reader can put all of these pieces together, and it's not boring at all because the storytelling is so different. So for example, in a diary entry, the storytelling and the narrative is so different from just a kind of report or some just interview style. And this makes it quite easy to read and also quite entertaining because it's not boring and it's not always the same. Whereas in Strange Houses, I think it was way too much dialogue, so basically all the time, and you felt like you got presented the results all the time. So you didn't really get time to breathe and to think for yourself. But here you have these 11 different cases. I won't go into more detail of the cases because I think that would take away too much of the plot. But just imagine all of them quite different, and some are just about a little hut that was built in the past with a water wheel that was not put to any proper use. That is weird, for example. And then like a very large mansion that only seemingly 2 or 3 people seem to live in, and you're thinking, why is that? What's that for? And some room or some building that has like a dead end and you don't know why, so it doesn't lead anywhere. Something like that. Ideas that also appeared in Strange Houses sometimes, but also a lot of new ideas. And first you get to read all of these 11 stories, and you also get presented pictures and floor plans, lots of floor plans, but as you are used to them already, if you have read Strange Houses before, you already know a little bit more what to look for. And the way that this is presented here is pretty well done, I think, because you get time to think. And also, it is not like any information is revealed too soon, so you actually have the possibility to make some conclusions to yourself, or at least to develop your own theories about what might have happened and how the stories are connected. So then after you've been reading these 11 different stories, and maybe you came up with some ideas of what might have been the story behind it or how they are connected, then you get presented the deductions by Kurihara and the author together. Basically, it's Kurihara and his very genius insights, but I think the good thing is that a lot of the ideas you could have come up with yourself. So I would recommend, if you read the book, that you take some time before you read this kind of conclusion and just try to draw the connections together and try to think of for yourself, like how are these stories connected and why is this detail mentioned here and there. And then you can read the conclusion and you can see whether you find it convincing or not. So let us now talk about the strength and the weaknesses of the story. So as I said, the strength is in the structure in itself. I like that it's 11 stories, and then you have the kind of conclusion through Kurihara and the author. So each of the stories are very different. So you have a very compelling, entertaining plot. And also, as the structure is quite different, and the kind of primary source material and then the dialogues. It is really well done, and it is entertaining and easy to follow. The language is also quite plain and simple, but still also includes some very nice description. So I think that is also pretty well done, especially if you want a rather easy read and nothing that you need a dictionary for. And also the kind of collage structure, I like that a lot. So that you have these different kinds of elements. You have the floor plans and images and like sketches that the author made, and then these different kinds of formats of like the diary entry and stuff like that. And all of that comes together, and you can really make the connections yourself, and that's really good. So also the interactive part is really well done here, I think. So from like the third story onwards, you can try to come up with your own ideas how things are connected. That is really well done as well. And also that the reader can take time to breathe and to think about what is happening and come up with their own conclusions before they are presented to the reader, and you are really feeling like you're more part of the story and not just someone who like watches a video in double speed and just like, you know, absorbs everything without really understanding or something like that. That's more what I felt with Strange Houses, because it was just too fast paced and too short for as much as it wanted to tell. And I think here it's done much better. The length is also pretty good. I think it's around 350 pages, depending on the edition, maybe sometimes more, sometimes less. But compared to Strange Houses, that was just around 200 pages. So I think that was too short for what Uketsu wanted to tell. So that was also much better. And I think overall, like the interactive element and the way that it was structured and the way that suspense is built is also really done well. So I think at least from the fourth or fifth story, you really want to learn the like bigger picture behind it and what's really going on. So that's done really well. And now about the weaknesses, I think, as I mentioned, the character development and the character depth, there's not so much. I think it would have been better to focus on fewer characters, but give them a little bit more background and a little bit more story. I mean, that's also like the structure is like the idea that people come and talk about things, weird things happening in their past or something like that. So you're not really in the scene. That's not even really possible most of the time. But still, I think I would have liked to explore a little bit more of the people and the characters themselves, so getting to know them a little better and not be presented like a very long list of names and families and stuff and trying to remember everything. I think that would have been a lot better. Other than that, I think the mystery itself, you can debate whether you find it convincing or not. I won't take away any details as promised, but I think I would like to discuss that. And also that there's some things just don't add up. And I'm not really sure if that was like on purpose, so that Uketsu was including details that he would think would serve as like a red herring to distract people from the real story, what is like real information that is really important, or if he just included the elements and then forgot about them or forgot that he mentioned them, because there's lots of details that are actually playing a role, and that's really well done. But then there's also some details that are just mentioned several times and you don't really understand in the end why they were mentioned so often. And I don't know, maybe someone can explain that to me, but so far I haven't really figured it out myself. But apart from that, I think the strengths definitely outweigh the weaknesses. So I think Uketsu has learned a lot, especially in comparison to Strange Houses. Strange Buildings is a little bit different from both of the others, but I think so far actually it's probably the best. So Strange Pictures was pretty great because of the psychological depth of these drawings, because I think especially drawings that are made by people that are something that is so personal and so emotional most of the time, other than floor plans that are just serving a special purpose or function. But here in Strange Buildings, as you're taken to the scenes and people telling how they are living in these houses and how things and events have been happening in these houses and how they experience that, that is taking you more into the scene and the story. So that's much better than just having floor plans and trying to imagine something based on this like very two-dimensional space in a way. So this is actually more three-dimensional, if you will. That's a lot better, and that's what I loved a lot. I also wanted to read to you a quote from an interview that Uketsu was giving recently to the Billboard Magazine from the US. It was published on February 20, so just a few days ago. And it is about his new novel that is going to be published in English in, I don't know when, they haven't announced it yet. It was only released in Japanese in, I think, October 2025. It's called Strange Maps, or in Japanese, Henachizu. So it's just going on, and I think it's around 200 maps or something. And the idea is also that Kurihara, the architect, gets more of a backstory. So it's about his family and his past. And I don't know much more, but I think that sounds quite interesting, because if you like Kurihara as a character, it could be quite interesting and compelling to learn about him and his backstory. And also maps are interesting in comparison to floor plans and drawings maybe. But it's like his fourth novel now, and the first time that he's been revisiting all of these things, and the first time he's been writing since 2023. So with quite a long break. And he comments on his previous novels as well in this interview, and he says, "With Strange Pictures, my first book, I always felt some regret. At the time, my skills weren't quite there yet, and especially toward the ending, I wasn't able to fully pull it together as a mystery. That feeling stayed with me for a long time. This time, writing my first full-length novel since Strange Houses, I wanted to incorporate motifs like abandoned settlements and deserted villages from that book, while making sure the story worked properly as a mystery. On top of that, I brought together everything I had learned and wanted to try across the previous 3 books, the literary fiction approach I developed in Strange Pictures, and the complex, layered foreshadowing I challenged myself with in Strange Houses 2:11 floor plans. I wrote it with the intention of consolidating everything. After spending nearly a year on its creation, I wanted this one to be the book I could confidently hand people who wanted to know what kind of writer Uketsu is, and say, please start with this." So I'm really interested in learning about Strange Maps once it is translated, and seeing whether it's actually the best of the 4 that he's been writing so far. I think it's always a little bit frustrating to know that Japanese people have already read it and they've been discussing it on the internet all over, especially if you're looking on pages like Reddit and stuff. But if you're not an Asian person, or you're not able to read Japanese in such a amount, or you also lack the time, then it's difficult. But still, I mean, you also have something to look forward to. So I think all in all, Strange Buildings could be for you if you want to get to know Uketsu and his kind of storytelling. I don't think you have to read Strange Houses beforehand, especially because it's not really a good book, although I've been reading comparisons and also like recommendations that people would say you could or should start with Strange Houses. I personally started with Strange Pictures and think that was also all right. I think all of them are actually worth reading, although Strange Houses was not a really good book, as Uketsu obviously thinks himself by now. But I think Strange Buildings is really a good book, especially if you want this interactive element and you want to have a story that's not just like completely being told to you, but you also can try to make these connections yourself and really become part of the story in a way. that was really, really well done. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any questions about the book, about Uketsu, about mystery novels, whatever, let me know, or just drop me a comment or a message. I would love to hear it. And if you have read any of the novels, the other novels, or this one, please let me know how you liked it. I have also made reviews on Strange Pictures and Strange Houses last year. I will link them up here and also below in the description. And I will also link my playlist to my other kinds of videos, so you can check those out as well. So if you're looking for the book, it is released in the UK in late February, so right now, by Pushkin Vertigo. They have also offered me an advanced review copy to read beforehand, so thanks to the publishing house for that. And the novel will also be released in English in the US in March, and it will also be released in German in March, and also probably in other languages. I haven't checked that out, but if you're interested, I'm sure that you can find lots of information. But the English version, translated by Jim Rion, is definitely available. I will also link below a blog post by Jim Rion where he talks about strange maps, so the next book, and I think that could also be interesting if you're interested and want to learn more. So as you can see, I have actually been hooked to read Uketsu's work from the beginning, and I won't stop so soon. So I'm really curious to see how his writing will develop over the next few years. And if you're interested, stay tuned. I will see you in my next video, and I will link all of my other reviews of Strange Pictures and Strange Houses up here and also below in the description, same as the playlists to all of my other videos. So feel free to check those out, and thanks for watching. I will hopefully see you in my next video. Let me know what you think of the novel or of Uketsu's writing, and bye bye. Have a good day.